give you a bit of background and a bit of context to what it is that we actually do before I start asking you some questions. So we are a bridging gap organisation called Remote Inclusion. We help disabled candidates, people with chronic illnesses, single parents, essentially people who can't work regular 9-to-5 jobs, find fully remote work through our employment agencies, because we are trying to fix what I believe is a very broken part of the employment system, because I feel like a lot of overlooked talent kind of just a lot of talent gets overlooked because of people's circumstances, not because of any fault of their own, just purely because of the circumstances that they're in, and normal day-to-day work just isn't accessible for them, and it doesn't fit their life. So I want to kind of wanted to kind of create these informal conversations with people. One, to get a bit of awareness so we can post it to our audience and create a network, but also to actually really drive this into companies and businesses to show them, because as much as companies and people say that they're inclusive and they work with inclusivity, they don't. So we're trying to create that awareness. So I want to know a little bit more about you and what it is that you do and your experience and just everything. So give me a little brief about you, and then we'll go into some questions.
So I am the founder of a disability consultancy called Crystallize. I work with organizations on any aspect of disability inclusion, but with an interest in the needs of those who are vision impaired. And that is mainly driven by the fact that I am blind myself. So the work that I do, it's very, very varied and very broad. So it can be as simple as, can you please come and do some disability awareness training for our teams and our organization, to more complex pieces of work like, could you please do an access audit of our website or our recruitment process? Or we want to become a disability and competent employer. Where are we on that journey? I also go into buildings and provide access audits of those buildings from a lived experience perspective rather than the perspective of an architect or a surveyor. So that's really me and what I do.
Oh, that's great. Well, there's a lot of alignment there with what we do and what you do. So how would you say your lived experience has shaped the work that you do today?
I think my lived experience has given me a real sense of what organizations need. Not least the fact that I think lots of companies think that disability inclusion is harder than it is. And actually, if you break it down into very, very small, manageable steps, you really have got a chance as an organization of getting somewhere. And I think it's about communicating that message. And I think it's also about embracing that people will make assumptions about what disabled people can and can't do. We can all sit here and say that they shouldn't, and we can all sit here and bemoan their negativity, but actually that's the reality. So it's about embracing the fact that those assumptions are made. And I know that by doing the job that I do, I am proving people wrong every single day.
Well, that's great. Well, would you say that's like a big misconception that people would have for someone who, for people who are blind or have sight loss?
I think there are misconceptions out there, yes.
Okay. And what's something that you would wish more people would understand, or what's something that you'd wish people would understand more about accessibility, especially in terms of work culture?
I think organizations and by extension people, when we think about accessibility and inclusion, we always think about infrastructure. Does a building have a wheelchair ramp, or does it have accessible parking? But actually, for a blind person, for example, people are my most important infrastructure, not the infrastructure itself.
Of course,
So
yeah.
people need to understand that they are as important a part of the disability inclusion infrastructure as the physical, as the building in which they work.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, because I mean, a lot of our candidates, as much as they are like mainly targeting, or we are targeting disabled candidates, our demographic is disabled candidates, people who suffer with chronic illnesses, and single parents. These are people who can't actually work regular 9 to 5s. So when we think about accessibility, it's exactly what you said. They just think about the infrastructure of the building and how it's
Yeah.
actually designed. It's not actually about the job itself and the job role that they've got to do, which is what we want our business to kind of help and try and fix that. Would you think, or do you think that society is improving when it comes to inclusion, or do you still think we've got like a pretty long way to go?
I can only speak from a vision impairment perspective on this. And the reason I caveat my answer by saying that is that, given there are 16 million disabled people in the UK and that number is rising, you could probably ask, you know, several people the same question and you would receive several different answers.
Mm.
Um, for me, as a blind person, I do think it is getting better. I think that people are much more willing to learn than they used to be. With that being said, the same barriers persist. So even if people are becoming more open, the same barriers persist. So, for example, too many organizations have inaccessible websites. Too many organizations have inaccessible recruitment processes. Too many organizations do not invest in staff training. And um, there could be lots of reasons why, but I think ultimately it all boils down to the fact that we as disabled people are still not as good as we should be at articulating the business case for doing these things. It's not just a moral imperative, there is a business case, and we need to get better at articulating that.
So, from your experience, then, what barriers do visually impaired people still face in employment?
The barriers would be inaccessible websites are a big problem,
Hmm.
so it or by extension application forms. So if you can't, if if a form has not been checked for accessibility for somebody who is using a screen reader like JAWS, and that might be the main piece of software that a person uses, or the main piece of assistive technology a person uses, why are they going to apply? They're not going to apply, are they?
Yeah.
Um, what does an accessible interview process look like? There might be written tasks, but too often the infrastructure isn't put in place, even when people ask for it. Um, Training, again, I come back to training. I would say in every organization I've worked in, as an employee, which I did before becoming self-employed, I trained all the staff. No one else did, which is great for me because I could shape them in my image. But really, it shouldn't have been down to me as an employee to do that. There should have been a proper program in place.
So,
So I think those are some of the barriers, and sometimes the methods of assessment that organizations use. So the online assessments that you're made to do as part of some application processes can be really hard for people with a vision impairment to access. So I think those are a few of the barriers that are still all too prevalent, and we need to work harder to address those and remove them.
if those barriers were removed, or if we tackled those barriers, would that look like true inclusion to you in terms of a workplace?
Well, I think it would be a big hurdle. I
Hmm.
don't think it is. I don't think it is I don't think it's the solution in its entirety, because I think we have to look a lot harder at what we can do to ensure that vision impaired people actually have the skills and attributes to go and be successful in the workplace. Um, I used to run an employment program for a local sight loss charity to where when I say local, I mean local to where I live. And if I give you a really, really simple example, we had people on our program who didn't know how to shake hands properly with somebody when they met them for an interview.
Oh, really?
Because not because they didn't want to, but because they'd never seen it happen. Because
Oh,
if you
wow.
don't see the world around you, but they've never seen it happen, and no one had ever actually shown them how,
That's
right?
actually very, yeah. That's a
So
different, complete different way of looking at things. Wow. Yeah, of course.
So, so we have to think about the infrastructure. So we have to think about the training programs that are out there to make sure that, vision impaired people are able to work just as effectively and just as well in a sighted world as their sighted counterparts. So we need employers to do more by removing the infrastructural barriers like the inaccessible recruitment processes, the inaccessible websites, the inaccessible application forms. But we also need a greater emphasis on skill and attribute development amongst vision impaired people. And that's, I think, something we just haven't got right yet.
So, could you give me any examples then, if where you've seen, or even if you haven't seen, whether you've like companies doing that right or doing it wrong? Like, have you seen like companies doing that right or wrong?
So, a really good example of a company that I think is really on the right path is, in terms of the employment side, is an organization called Burgess Salmon. And
Okay.
Burgess Salmon are a law firm. They're a Bristol-based law firm. Now, I don't know whether they employ anybody who is vision impaired. I have a feeling that they do. Um, but what they realized was that actually there were lots of people in their workforce or amongst their workforce who weren't disclosing their disabilities even when it was quite patently obvious that they needed support. And that was because of the perceived stigma that those individuals were fearful of. And so Burgess Salmon looked very hard at what they could do to increase disclosure. And one of the things that they did was that they have invested in an approved list of assistive technology that comes with every single employee's laptop as a standard offer. And the employee decides what they need and what they don't need. And what they said was that they saw two benefits. The one, people were disclosing more frequently because, having all these technologies available just made the whole subject of access and inclusion just feel the norm. It didn't feel different because it was something that everybody was thought bit aware of. But the other thing they noticed was that actually it made the entire workforce more efficient and more productive. Because, for example, if a lawyer was reading a really, really long document, sometimes they would use the screen reader just to be able to give themselves a rest whilst reading. So they were then less tired, which meant that they could be more productive for longer.
Well, do you know what? That actually answers the next question I was going to have for you, because I was going to ask, how can employers make remote working environments more accessible, and what are positives and negatives of remote work for visually impaired people? But when you're saying stuff like, oh, that this company, they produce or they give laptops where they can help their workers actually do their job a bit more efficiently, that actually answers my next question.
Yeah,
Um,
I think there's that. I think that employers also need to, you need to. that you need to be producing information that's accessible, right?
Yeah.
So employers should be investing in document accessibility training, so that when they're posting something in Microsoft Teams or or Google Drive, whatever it is that an organization uses, it is accessible from the outset, and so you're then reducing the toing and froing that people need to undergo if there's an issue or if there's something that they can't access. Um, and I think it's being more open to flexible working. I know that flexible working is a thing, but the fact is that, disabled people, whether we like it or not, do require a bit more flexibility.
Yeah.
It may be that an individual has more hospital appointments they've got to go to than others, right? So, um, it's about being flexible, creating environments where people are trusted. So when they work when they want to work or when they can work, but if they're not working, they're not criticized and questioned at every turn. So I think that's a cultural shift that could be improved. Um, Equally, it has to be made very clear to disabled people who are perhaps taking advantage of some of those benefits that they've got to play their side of the bargain or keep to their side of the bargain by making sure that when they are working at their absolute full capacity. And I think that again, we criticize businesses too easily on this, but frankly, there are disabled people that take advantage of flexibility and take
Yeah.
advantage of perks or of people's understanding and empathy. And we have to get the balance right to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Okay. All right. Well, actually, that does make a lot of sense, and actually, yeah, that's pretty insightful on that. So, I'm going to kind of shift more to like on the confidence side of things. So, if you could give advice to someone struggling with their confidence after losing their sight or facing, like, what advice would you give them in terms of like trying to get their life back to normality, actually going back to work and finding a job? Like, how would you advise someone?
I think that well, I think what I would say is that you need to think about employment as a roadmap,
Hmm.
right? And I had clients, and I think we as people tend to frankly think that the first and most important thing we need to do is get a job, right? And if we get a job, everything goes away. Actually, the first thing that somebody needs to do is come to terms with their disability,
Hmm.
um, seek specialists, understand the skills that they need to develop in order to be successful in the job market. Go and develop those skills through specialist partnerships or working with specialist organizations. Maybe do some volunteering in different sectors to get a real feel for the things that they can do and the things that they can't do, and only at that point then apply for meaningful paid employment. So what I'm trying to say is that paid employment is the last step on the roadmap. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to go down the route of what is called supported employment. I'm not sure if you're familiar with supported employment, but essentially it's where you work with a provider who writes or creates in partnership with you and your circle of influence what's called a vocational profile. That person or that organization then does a comprehensive job analysis. They then match you to a job where they know that an organization has a particular need, and then they look to support you to not only maintain that role, but actually then develop the skills and confidence to progress in your career. So there are two distinct ways that you could do that. You could approach that.
Okay. Okay. No, I get that. I get that. So how much, sorry, my last question is, how important is community and representation for disabled people?
I think it's hugely important.
Okay.
Um, I think if disabled people see other disabled people in jobs, being valued parts of society, it creates that sense of belonging and that feeling that they can achieve what they want to achieve. Um, I think that when you live in a community or work in a community where you feel as though you are the only disabled person, I think it can feel very overwhelming for some. I think it can feel isolating for some. There is no question that community, that sense of community and that sense of belonging is hugely important. And we as individuals and we as employees, we as individuals and those employers that are out there need to think really carefully about, what they can do to increase that community representation, because ultimately, by employing and working with more disabled people, you create a workforce and a society that is genuinely representative of the people it seeks to serve.
So, if with that being said, then what changes would you want to see within the workplace culture in the next 5 to 10 years or so?
I want to see I want to see a comprehensive awareness training programs. I think
Okay.
that's where it starts and ends. I think you need to see recruitment processes that are truly inclusive and truly flexible. And I think you want to see supported employment, which is one of the approaches I was talking about earlier on, not just becoming something a bit different, but becoming, frankly, the norm. Because I think by doing those things, by doing all of those things, again, you will create workforces that are truly representative of the communities that they are seeking to serve. And actually employers will find increased will experience increased loyalty and increased productivity.
Okay, perfect. Well, though that covers all my questions. I really appreciate, like I said, you taking the time today to speaking to me. It was very insightful, everything you said. Um, yeah, I think that covers everything. So thank you again so much. I do really appreciate it.
No worries. What made you set up your organization? I mean, are you disabled yourself, or what was your driver?
Actually, it's a good question you asked that you asked. I'm doing this with my business partner, and my business partner was actually disabled. He used to be disabled. Well, actually, no, he still is
Yeah.
disabled, and he was the one that came up with the idea of it because he had before this, prior to this, he was like an everyday man, get up, do his job, go to do, like what normal people do,
Mm,
and then he was in a wheelchair and he was the one that came up well came like had this realization that if it wasn't for the fact of you know him being in a wheelchair he wouldn't understand the struggles and like what it is that you guys face on a day-to-day basis, and it is very limited for you guys out there. There isn't, I mean, the accessibility, the way people say that, oh, we're inclusive, it just doesn't exist. It's not, that's not a culture that exists. As much as people say that it does, it doesn't. And he only
yeah.
came to terms with that once he wasn't in a wheelchair, and that was when he came up with the idea of having fully remote work for people who aren't able to access 9 to 5 jobs or be in a workplace where it's accessible to them. Um, and when he pitched the idea to me, I absolutely loved it because it's the incentive behind it is amazing. It helps people, and I'm fully on board
Yeah.
with anything that helps people. So that's how we kind of like came into this. But yeah.
And how long has the business been running
So it was in the works for about a year, and then we officially started it up in January.
of this year?
Yeah. So at the very like
And
beginning
how
stages of it.
much, yeah, yeah, yeah. And how much traction are you actually getting with businesses?
So at the moment, organisations do want to work with us because it won't cost them anything. It's just at the minute we're looking for candidates. So this is why I'm setting up some informal conversations with people via LinkedIn and just reaching out to as many people as I can because I want to create a network with people so that we have disabled candidates to create that network and also so we can supply them with some job roles. So like I said, we're at the very, very beginning of everything. Hence why I'm having these conversations. But yeah.
So how do you how do you intend for it to be how do you intend to make money from it?
So it's almost like set up as a. It's we're not a recruitment agency. We're not an employment agency. So whereas recruitment agency could be taking maybe like 5-10% off of people's salaries once they find people a job, we're not taking. We're taking maybe like 5%, even less than that. We're just taking a small flat fee off their salary. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Because I think there are some I've got some consultancy partners that I think would be quite interested
Okay.
potentially in working with you, collaborating. I don't really know what it looks like. We'd have to have a proper conversation about it, and I'd have to really get my head around what you do and how it works.
Yeah, that sounds
Um,
great.
but I think that there might be two or three that come to mind.
That would be
Um,
amazing.
and where are you based?
So our office is registered in Bristol, but we're based in London,
So where in London are you?
North London.
Oh, okay. So I live just outside London, and I'm in London all the time.
Okay,
I'm in London all the time. Um, would you be up for going for a coffee or something like
absolutely,
that? Because
absolutely.
I feel that there is something to understand, to draw out,
Mhm.
and there are partnerships to be had. I'm just not because I've only spoken to you for 20 minutes. I'm not I'm not quite seeing what that looks like,
Yeah,
but I know it's there. Do you know
yeah.
what I mean? Like I
That's
know it's
absolutely
there
yeah.
and I think it's there.
Well, that's absolutely what we can do because I
Um,
do.
if you were up for that,
Yeah, of
then I would
course.
be very open to that.
That's absolutely right. I do have a call in the next 5 minutes, but
Yeah, have it.
I'm absolutely happy to arrange a day to meet up with you, and I can bring my business partner as well, so we can both meet you and actually introduce the business a little bit properly. Because I understand I've only had a 20-minute call.
Yeah.
It's a lot to.
So I'll because I've now got your email address because the Zoom link came by email as well.
Okay,
I'll ping you an email early next week.
perfect.
And let's try and get something set up.
Yeah, no problem.
Um, because I'm just I definitely think there's something there, but I need to really um get into the weeds a bit.
Of course, yeah,
And understand and frankly there might be things that I can do in return, although again we need to talk about it, but I think it would just actually be really good to meet you properly because I think that there is a partnership, well, a partnership not necessarily with me, but I definitely think there is something out there. I just don't know what it looks like.
okay, no problem. That sounds great.
And
Thank you.
actually, and I know you've got to go, one of the things that I have noticed it's become more and more prevalent is that it's very hard for small consultancies like this to get off the ground now.
Yeah,
So much of it is around partnerships.
yeah,
I would say 90% of my work comes from partnerships.
really.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
And I set up in 2021. And I would say when I set up in 21 and 22, it was probably 20%.
Oh wow. Okay, well, that would, I mean, it would definitely help because where we're at right now. We are kind of like a bit of a standstill because it's very much we've got the employers, well, we've got employment agencies, but we need more employment agencies and we need more companies to work alongside with us. But then we also need the
Yeah.
candidates, and it's very hard to find candidates, especially when, we can reach out to as many people as we can. We've tried reaching out to DWP. We've tried to reach out as many people as we can, but to actually create a network, that's what's really difficult at the minute. So that would actually
Yeah.
really help
I
us.